Racist lady judges black pilot. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. I gripped the armrests of my seat so tightly that my fingers ached. My watch taunted me with every passing second, and my chest tightened as I thought about what was slipping away. This flight was supposed to take off 30 minutes ago, but we were still stuck on the tarmac. If I didn't get to Los Angeles by 5 p.m., my shot at Survivor, my chance at $1 million, would be gone. I glanced around the cabin, tapping my foot impatiently. The other passengers seemed relaxed, indifferent to the disaster unfolding in my world. They didn't understand. This was everything to me. And then I saw him. The reason we weren't in the air yet. The captain. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of calm authority that only made me angrier. My eyes narrowed as he walked toward the cockpit, and something inside me snapped. "Hey, shouldn't you be down below with the baggage handlers?" I muttered, just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. He didn't react, didn't even look my way. He just kept walking. His silence infuriated me even more. "Are you seriously the captain?" I called out, louder this time. This time, he paused, turned his head slightly in my direction, but instead of answering, he simply gave me a level look before stepping into the cockpit and closing the door behind him. I scoffed, shaking my head. "I knew I shouldn't have booked with a woke airline," I muttered under my breath. This is exactly what happens when you hire people based on quotas instead of qualifications. A few heads turned, but I didn't care. Let them look. I wasn't going to sit here and pretend like this was normal. "A black pilot," I said to no one in particular. "What's next? A Chinese chef in an Italian restaurant?" The flight attendant walking down the aisle faltered for just a second before regaining her composure. She smiled politely, though I could see the tension in her face. "Ma'am, I understand the delay is frustrating, but the captain is working on an alternate flight plan due to weather conditions over the Rockies. We appreciate your patience." I let out a dry laugh. "Right, weather. Sure. It's always something, isn't it? Tell me the truth. Is he really qualified to fly this plane? Or is he here because your airline wanted to check a diversity box?" The flight attendant's smile faltered. "Captain Rod has been flying for over 30 years, ma'am. He's one of the best pilots we have." 30 years of what, exactly? I mean, let's be honest here. Do you really expect me to believe he's the best? Or is he just the best you could find to fit a certain image? The attendant's eyes hardened, but she kept her voice controlled. "Ma'am, I assure you, the captain is more than capable. And I would appreciate it if you kept your comments respectful." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Am I making people uncomfortable? Are we not allowed to talk about the real issues anymore?" I could feel the tension in the air now. Other passengers were listening. Some were whispering. Others just stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear. But I knew they agreed with me. They were just too afraid to say it. A few more minutes passed, and still, we weren't moving. I clenched my fists, my frustration bubbling over. This was ridiculous. I wasn't about to sit here in silence while my future slipped away. I stood up. "What's the holdup?" I called out toward the front of the plane. "Why are we still sitting here? Are we waiting for the pilot to figure out how to fly?" The flight attendant was at my side in an instant. "Ma'am, please take your seat." "Number, I want answers. Why are we delayed? Why is he up there instead of getting us in the air?" At that moment, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. He walked toward me with measured steps, his expression unreadable. He stopped just a few feet away, standing tall, his presence commanding. He didn't need to raise his voice. His mere presence silenced the murmurs around us. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "do you have a problem with me flying this plane?" I crossed my arms. "You bet I do." He nodded, as if he expected that answer. "And what exactly is the problem?" "The problem," I said, "is that I have a very important meeting in Los Angeles, and you've already put us behind schedule. You people are never on time." His eyes darkened. "You people," I smirked. "Yeah, you people. Don't act like you don't know what I mean." There was a moment of silence. The air in the cabin felt thick, like a storm was about to break. I could see passengers shifting in their seats, their gazes flicking between us. Then, slowly, the captain spoke. "So, let me get this straight," he said. "You think we're delayed because I'm black?" I shrugged. "I don't think it. I know it. This is what happens when airlines make hiring decisions based on optics instead of experience." His face remained calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "Ma'am, we are delayed because of a storm over the Rockies, not because of my skin color." "Oh, please," I scoffed. "There are plenty of other pilots who could have handled this. Real pilots." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Real pilots." "Yeah," I said, my voice dripping with condescension. "Real pilots who actually earned their positions instead of getting handed them on a silver platter." He exhaled slowly, as if trying to keep his composure. Then he took a step closer. "Ma'am, do you know what this tattoo means?" he asked, rolling up his sleeve slightly to reveal an insignia on his arm. I frowned. "What?" "This," he said, pointing to the ink on his forearm. "This is the emblem of the Tuskegee Airmen. My grandfather flew with them in World War II. They were the first black pilots to serve in the U.S. military. They flew over 1,500 missions and never lost a single bomber under their protection." I stared at him, my smirk fading just slightly. "My father served in the Navy for 20 years. I served in the Air Force for 25. I've flown over 30 combat missions in 3 different conflicts. And you," he said, his voice lowering, "think I got this job because of a quota?" I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very small. But I wasn't ready to back down. "Oh, sure," I said, forcing a laugh. "Great story. But it doesn't change the fact that we're still on the ground. And you're the reason why." His expression didn't change, but his voice did. It was quieter now, sharper. "You know what, ma'am?" he said. "You're about to get exactly what you asked for." I blinked. "What?" He turned to the flight attendant. "Escort her off the plane." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Wait, what?" "You don't trust me to fly you," he said simply. "So I won't." I felt the color drain from my face. "You can't do that." "Actually," he said, "I can." I turned to the flight attendant, to the other passengers, searching for support. "Are you seriously going to let him do this? This is insane!" But no one spoke up for me. No one moved. Because deep down, I knew I had done this to myself. And as I felt the security officers take hold of my arm, guiding me toward the exit, I realized the bitter truth. I had lost, not just my flight, but everything, and there was no one to blame but me. As I was being escorted off the plane, my mind spiraled. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. This was supposed to be the beginning of something big for me, my chance to change my life forever. I had been picturing myself on Survivor, competing for $1 million, proving that I was tough, strategic, and above all, a winner. But now, here I was, walking down the narrow aisle with 2 security officers at my sides, my pride shattered, my future slipping through my fingers like sand. Passengers whispered, their gazes piercing through me like daggers. I could feel the judgment, the silent condemnation, the quiet satisfaction of people who thought I was getting exactly what I deserved. I wanted to lash out, to scream that they were all hypocrites, that I was just saying what everyone was thinking, but too afraid to admit. But the words wouldn't come. My throat was tight, my chest heavy. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerless. When we reached the exit, I hesitated. I turned back to face the captain, who stood tall and unshaken near the cockpit door, watching me with an expression that was unreadable. I wanted to say something, to hurl one last insult, to fight for my dignity. But then I saw it. His eyes. There was no smugness, no victory in them, just disappointment. It hit me harder than I expected. I stepped off the plane. The cold blast of air hit my face as soon as I was back in the terminal. The officers didn't say much. They just escorted me to the nearest counter and told me to wait. I crossed my arms, my mind racing with thoughts of how to salvage this. Maybe I could book another flight, find a way to get to Los Angeles in time. But when I checked my phone, my stomach dropped. My screen was flooded with notifications, texts, missed calls, and then I saw it. A video. I tapped it with trembling fingers. The title alone made my blood run cold. Racist woman kicked off flight after berating black pilot. The thumbnail was unmistakable. It was me, mid-rant. My face twisted in anger. My mouth caught mid-sentence. I pressed play, and there it was, the entire thing. My comments, my accusations, the moment the captain called security on me. Someone had recorded the whole thing and uploaded it online, and it was spreading like wildfire. The comments were brutal. This is what happens when ignorance meets karma. Imagine being this bold and this wrong at the same time. Hope she enjoys watching Survivor from her couch, because that's the only place she'll be competing. Panic set in. My breathing became shallow. I scrolled faster, hoping for something, anything that defended me. But there was nothing. Not one person standing up for me. Not one person who agreed. I felt sick. As I stood there, frozen in place, a woman nearby cleared her throat. I looked up to see an older lady, maybe in her 60s, giving me a long, appraising stare. "You know," she said, shaking her head, "there was a time when people like you got away with this sort of thing." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" She folded her arms, unimpressed. "You don't seem like a stupid person, just ignorant, and now you've paid the price for it." My jaw tightened. "I'm not ignorant." She let out a dry laugh. "Then why are you standing here, banned from your flight, watching your life fall apart because you couldn't keep your mouth shut?" I clenched my phone in my hand, my knuckles white. I was just frustrated. I had somewhere important to be. "We all have somewhere important to be," she said, "but most of us don't humiliate ourselves in the process." I felt my temper flare again, but this time it was different. There was no audience, no one to back me up, no one to argue with. It was just me, standing in the middle of the airport, realizing that I had ruined everything. The woman gave me one last look before turning away, walking toward her gate. I swallowed the lump in my throat and lowered my gaze. I had nothing left to say. Hours passed. My phone never stopped buzzing. My Survivor audition? Canceled. They had seen the video. The producers had already sent me a short, cold email. "Thank you for your interest, but we will be moving forward with other candidates." Just like that, my dream was dead. I sat on a bench, staring at the floor, the weight of everything crushing me. I had spent years imagining myself on that show, planning my strategy, telling myself that one day I'd prove to everyone that I was a fighter. And now, The only thing people would remember me for was this moment, this mistake. But the worst part wasn't that I had lost the audition. It was that I had done this to myself. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, the voice of a flight attendant caught my attention. I looked up to see a familiar face. The same woman who had tried to de-escalate the situation on the plane. She was off duty now, wearing a simple jacket instead of her uniform, but she still carried herself with the same quiet confidence. She hesitated before speaking. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I swallowed hard. "Not anymore." She nodded, then took a seat next to me. She didn't say anything right away, just looked out at the runway as planes took off one after another. "You know," she said after a while, "Captain Rod wasn't angry." I let out a short, bitter laugh. He had every right to be. "He was disappointed," she corrected, "and that's worse." I felt something twist in my gut. "Why are you even talking to me?" I asked. "Shouldn't you be celebrating that I got what I deserved?" She sighed. "I don't think anyone deserves to have their life fall apart over one bad decision, but I also think you need to understand why this happened." I looked down at my hands. "I do." "Do you?" she challenged. "Or are you just upset that people caught it on camera?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, until that moment, I hadn't really thought about it. I had been so wrapped up in my own embarrassment, my own loss, that I hadn't stopped to consider the damage I had caused. Not just to myself, but to others. "The thing is," she continued, "Captain Rod has been dealing with people like you his entire career. You weren't the first, and you won't be the last. But what people don't realize is that every time he faces that kind of ignorance, he has to decide whether to let it get to him or to rise above it, and he always rises above it." I looked at her, my throat tight. "So what do I do now?" She exhaled slowly, considering. "You take a step back. You learn. You understand that this isn't just about you, that your words have consequences. And then, maybe one day, you find a way to make things right." I nodded, but I didn't know if I truly believed it yet. All I knew was that for the first time, I felt something close to regret. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't know what came next. I sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me harder than I had expected. My whole life, I had always believed that I was someone who didn't back down, someone who spoke their mind no matter the cost. But for the first time, I started to wonder if speaking my mind had cost me everything. The flight attendant stood up, stretching slightly before turning back to me. "Listen," she said, "I don't expect you to change overnight. People don't work like that. But you have a choice to make. You can walk away from this bitter and angry, blaming everyone but yourself. Or you can sit with it, really sit with it, and decide what kind of person you want to be moving forward." I nodded, but I still didn't have the words to respond. She gave me a small, almost sad smile. "Good luck," she said, before walking away and disappearing into the crowd. I watched her go, feeling something strange settle in my chest. It wasn't just regret. It was something deeper, something I wasn't used to feeling. It was the uncomfortable realization that for all the fights I had picked in my life, for all the ways I had convinced myself I was right, maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong all along. The days that followed were brutal. The video continued to spread. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, not to support me, but to ask if it was really me in the video. Strangers flooded my social media with hate, calling me every name under the sun. I lost my job. Not officially, but I could see it in the way my boss looked at me when I walked into the office, the way my coworkers whispered when I passed by. They weren't going to fire me outright, but they didn't need to. I wasn't welcome there anymore. Eventually, I stopped checking my phone, stopped refreshing the comments, stopped trying to convince myself that this would all blow over. It wouldn't. This was my legacy now. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself searching for information about Captain Rod. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe something that would make me feel justified in how I had treated him. Something that would prove that I hadn't been completely wrong. But what I found only made me feel worse. There were articles about him. Real articles. Ones that talked about his years of service in the Air Force, his family history with the Tuskegee Airmen, the number of missions he had flown. I found interviews where he spoke about the challenges he had faced in his career, about the constant battle to prove himself in an industry that had always been skeptical of men like him. And yet, nowhere in any of those interviews did I see a trace of anger. He never spoke bitterly about the people who had doubted him. He never lashed out. He just kept going. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something crack deep inside me. He had spent his entire life dealing with people like me. And I had spent my entire life believing that people like him were the problem. Weeks passed, then months. Eventually, the world moved on. Another scandal took over the news cycle. Another person became the target of public outrage. But I hadn't moved on. I couldn't. I thought about reaching out to Captain Rod more times than I could count. I even drafted emails, but I never sent them. What could I possibly say? Sorry for being a racist. Sorry for trying to ruin your career. Sorry for assuming you weren't good enough just because of the color of your skin. None of it felt like enough. One afternoon, I found myself at the airport again. Not because I was traveling. I had no reason to travel anymore. I had lost my job, lost my opportunities, lost everything. But I was drawn there anyway. Maybe because it was the place where my life had fallen apart. Or maybe because I was still searching for something. Redemption, maybe. Or at least, understanding. I wandered through the terminal aimlessly, watching people rush to their flights, watching pilots in their crisp uniforms walk past without a second glance. And then, as if fate had intervened, I saw him. Captain Rod. He was walking through the terminal, suitcase in hand, speaking with a flight attendant. I felt my body freeze. I could leave. I could turn around right now and pretend I never saw him. But something inside me wouldn't let me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped forward. "Captain," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned, his eyes landing on me. For a second, I saw a flicker of recognition. But he said nothing. He just waited. My mouth went dry. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, but now that it was here, I didn't know what to say. I swallowed hard. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. He didn't respond immediately. He just studied me, his face unreadable. "You don't have to accept it," I rushed on, suddenly desperate to get the words out before my courage failed me. "I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to say it. I was wrong. About everything." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "What changed?" I let out a slow breath. "Everything." He held my gaze, as if searching for something. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. "Good," he said simply. I blinked. "That's it? What else do you want?" he asked. "Absolution. Forgiveness?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. He was right. I had no right to expect anything from him. He studied me for another second before speaking again. "People like you, they don't usually come back." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't know how to. He nodded slightly. Then, to my shock, he extended his hand. I stared at it for a moment. Then, hesitantly, I took it. His grip was firm, steady, unshaken. "It's never too late to be better," he said quietly. And just like that, he let go and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, rooted in place, my heart pounding. I didn't know if that moment changed anything. I didn't know if it made up for what I had done. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start again. And maybe, just maybe, I would. Sometimes the biggest wake-up call in life isn't when we lose something tangible, like a job or an opportunity, but when we realize we've been the problem all along. It's easy to go through life believing that we're always in the right, that our views are justified, that the world operates in a way that makes sense to us. But the truth is, our perspective isn't the only one that matters. This story isn't just about a delayed flight. It's about the dangers of making assumptions, of letting prejudice guide our words and actions, of believing we can say anything without consequences. The main character thought she was speaking the truth, but the truth wasn't hers to speak. She let her frustration turn into entitlement, her biases into anger, and in the end, she lost everything because of it. But the most important part of this story isn't the fall. It's what comes after. Mistakes don't define us. How we respond to them does. It takes real strength to acknowledge when we're wrong, to confront the uncomfortable reality that we've hurt people, and to decide that we want to change. It's not about being perfect. It's about being better. This isn't just a story about one person's downfall. It's a reflection of the world we live in. How often do we judge people without knowing their story? How often do we let our own frustration blind us to the truth? How often do we fail to listen before we speak? If this story made you think, even for a second, about the way we treat others, then take a moment to ask yourself, have I ever let my assumptions cloud my judgment? Have I ever been so sure of something that I refused to see another perspective? Have I ever let pride stop me from admitting when I was wrong? The journey to being better starts with self-awareness. It starts with being willing to listen, to learn, and to unlearn the things we thought we knew. And maybe, just maybe, it starts with a single apology. What are your thoughts? Have you ever had a moment in life where you had to confront a hard truth about yourself? Let's talk about it in the comments. Sometimes, the most important conversations start with just one question.